Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Emelie Hedén Edlund is a design director at McKinsey Design. She's based in Stockholm, Sweden. Emelie is experienced in design thinking and has a background in industrial design, trend forecasting, and futurism, as well as user and customer experience. She's been working with McKinsey on retail design, so I called her to ask about some of the changes we might expect to see in retail as we enter the post-pandemic next normal. Okay, so during this pandemic, we've seen retail as one of the most heavily impacted industries. Clearly, this was because during the lockdown process, most non-essential stores were closed. And then even now that they're opening, they have additional expense to keep the customers and the employees safe. But do you think that this was maybe a wake-up call for retail? We've talked about omni-channel retail as something nice. You know, it was a nice to have. It was always seen as the future of retail. But clearly, is this now an essential process for retailers?
Yes, I would answer yes. I think there are no retailers today who can completely ignore digital. I mean, before there was still the option to do so, but in many regions, considering lockdown and such, you have to go creative. And omnichannel and digital is obviously a big part of that. And we see that shift. And we also see adaptation in a tremendous speed. So like adaptation to technology has, like, what happened in years now took consumers weeks. And there are like consumer groups who would never shop online who are now online. Like in Sweden, where I live, for example, I know examples of many seniors who now do their grocery shopping online, and they had not had that experience before. So obviously, yes. And I know Latin America, there is like, I think it was 13 million people who made their first ever like e-commerce transaction. So I mean, yes, that tells us something. But I do also believe that we need to be very careful, because I think there will be an urge to come back to physical as well, even if the physical is going to change. It might not be exactly what it's been, but there's people are gonna they will gonna have to touch things again, and they want to touch things again and have that multi-sensorial experience and not only going online. And there's also the aspect, I would say, of inclusivity. So even if there are many people who are not used to online, who now get used to it, and they do their first online transaction, still there are many people globally who don't have that access. So it's not available to them. So how can we help these people? Can we make it available through SMS shopping? I know there are parts of the world where that is growing. And I think just looking beyond pure physical stores as we know them, or pure e-commerce as we know it, and find other very inclusive ways of inclusive and creative ways of retailing.
Yeah, and that creativity, I think, is going to be essential, because there were some areas of retail that were struggling before the pandemic, like department stores, large shopping malls, and now they have even more problems. You know, their costs have increased, and there's fewer people visiting these sites as well. So how can they find new ways of attracting people? How do they drum up and create more footfall when you know, we've had this pandemic and people are scared to go to these very large format retail environments?
I think part of the answer is that some of those will close. They will not have traffic enough to pay for those high rents in those shopping malls, which is usually, so they will find different places to have their physical stores. We see a big trend moving from like these huge central venues to more local pop-ups, and that's also more resilient, you could say, because you don't have to pay as much for it, and it's easier to scale down or scale up again. So that's interesting. I think definitely, yes, some are going to close and some are going to repurpose. So meaning I would think experiences, we've seen that before, and we know we live in an experience economy, but I think shopping malls as well, like going beyond like having the like the restaurant floor and the cinemas and things like that. What are the experience bit that people actually want, and how can that experience go into the shopping as well? Not maybe only like the things around it, but the shopping experience.
Yeah. So it needs to actually be a fun experience to go to the shops, not just the cinema as well. Yeah. And
yeah, correct.
That speaks to the sort of waves of innovation that we're starting to see now. And even before the pandemic, there were people like Starbucks and Walmart that were exploring loads of good ideas around payment on your phone, so you don't have to line up at the checkout, and all these kind of stuff. But do you see that all of these kind of no-touch innovations are really going to be pushed forward now?
Yeah, I mean, no touch, zero touch experiences in general, for sure. I think mobile payments, I just got my credit cards on my phone, and that was very much linked to COVID. I did not want to like touch things. And obviously, like cash feels very outdated, even for people who are like, feels cash is safer to have in your pocket, they would go onto these mobile solutions. So I think that's been happening very long, but maybe it's been accelerating through the crisis we're now experiencing. But there are other interesting technologies as well, like biometric, like scanning your eye or something else for doing your shopping, and not even to like have a device to do it. And also more low-tech versions. There are many good examples on QR codes. So where you, for a vending machine, for example, you scan a QR code with your personal device, the vending machine pops up in your phone, and you do your purchase on your phone, and you don't have to touch the machine at all. And those type of experiences we see all over. I mean, you could also do that same experience in a grocery store. You would actually walk around there, but you don't have to touch the things. And maybe someone could even pack up your things, and they would be ready for you when you go out, or even deliver to your home. So I think things like that. And also we've seen many examples, as you mentioned, like Starbucks and such, where you have to download an app, which is okay when you're a frequent customer. But if it's a one-off, it's very annoying. So everything we do needs to be minimum effort. And the QR code, which is very basic and been around for ages, is an example of that, how we don't have to download the app. You just like scan something and done.
Yeah, that's funny, because I would agree with you that the QR code is tried and tested, and it's actually low tech. But the British government were recently talking about their QR code scanning system for health tests, and they called it cutting edge technology. So I think there's a disconnect between the reality and the politicians sometimes.
But yeah, I think it's a point though, because it is, as I said, yeah, it feels very low tech. It's been around for ages, but there wasn't a real good purpose. You saw them on ads on the bus or somewhere, but who wanted to use them? No one. They were just there as a gimmick almost, and you ended up on a web page where you couldn't do anything. But now they have a purpose. So it's also loading technology with a purpose, and then maybe it becomes high tech.
Yeah. And something that I noticed during the lockdown period, a lot of retailers that had most of their stores closed, they really focused a lot on customer engagement. So I saw some of them launching online quizzes, games, having lots of online conversations. So they were really trying to remain visible, even though most of their stores were closed. And do you think that this kind of constant engagement and building an emotional connection is something that's going to continue?
I think the key point, what you're saying here, is emotional connection, but it's also equally important to understand, how do I trigger that emotional connection? And that's not just by making a fun game, because that might not be what your customers want. They might want something completely different. They might want a call from you to ask you how you're doing and how I can support you in your shopping or anything else in life. So it needs to be with a purpose. It's almost like all brands it's a reaction. They had to do something, so they went on social media, they tried to be visible, but you need to do the right thing. And I think now more than ever, brands with a purpose is what consumers want to support, basically. If it doesn't have a purpose, it doesn't mean anything. It's just wasted money, I would say.
Yeah. So it's easy just to make a lot of noise online, but without any kind of purpose behind it.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay.
So talk to your customers. That's my point. Like, make it customer centric and go out to talk to them first, and then you can do those fun games and things.
Yeah. So actually listen to what they want. Yeah. You mentioned earlier about possible changes in consumer behavior and the way that they interact with retailers. And I think specifically you mentioned how a lot of older consumers that maybe are not really comfortable with e-commerce have now tried it and find that it's actually very useful. So do you think that there are going to be several different sort of behavioral changes, or is that really the main one, the adoption of e-commerce?
No, I think that's only one. Maybe that's linked to something bigger. I would call it convenience overall. People want the ultra convenience, experiences and shopping that comes to you. I could imagine having like, instead of going to the bakery, bicycle would come by and they would have the fresh bread to you, like by your door. So ultra convenience. We heard it at any time, anywhere at any time. That applies, but it doesn't have to only mean online. I think bigger than that. Convenience.
Yeah, and that's a great example as well, because certainly here where I am in Brazil, I would normally go to the bakery in person all the time. Now it's just a WhatsApp message, and then a few minutes later the bread arrives at home. So it's, and I'm not going to go back and change my behavior. So that focus on convenience is really changing the way that I certainly interact with these companies.
Yeah, for sure. Me too.
Okay.
But and then I would say experience based. We said that as well, experience based. And one more thing is, like, how are people actually doing? So their mental health and mental well-being. So that's something we need to understand. That's not a shifting like consumer behavior, but it does affect what you want to invest in. Maybe it's less important to do your buy a new pair of jeans or a shirt. You don't care about that any longer. So how people actually feel and what they really desire is the most important thing to consider right now, I think.
Okay, and so I mean, in addition then to this change in consumer behavior, one of the key strategies that all of the analysts are talking about is resilience. How do you build resilience into the future of your business? And so what does resilience really mean for the retail industry now?
From my perspective as a designer, not being like the number one person to ask for numbers, I would say go out and test things. Don't invest a lot of money and then launch something, but think beta in everything you do. Even if it's a physical thing, do it in a pop-up version and try if it works with your consumers. See if that fits with the new behaviors, and then launch bigger if it works. I think a perfect example also as well is like these smaller local stores that are they base their stock on data. So they know what is most popular online, and then those are the items they take into the store, which means they don't have to have stock on everything. They can have a smaller store footprint, and still the things that people really desire are available there. So to have like a really close connection between the online and the physical, so having more of a showroom type physical store maybe in local context where it costs less. And then, so flexibility, testing, flexibility, beta versions, that type of thing. That's how I see it.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.